Hello, my beautiful anomalies, and welcome back. I'm Estrella, your lovely host. Today, our case is a sweet one. I'll dub this case Such a Sucker. You may find yourself looking over your shoulder, wondering if you are not alone. You may even wish to choose chocolate instead in the future. Let's get into it. This case involves Rudy Vandersheek, a 27-year-old male who grew up in the city of New York. He works as an accountant for a large company. Its name has been unfortunately redacted from the data here. He had blonde short cut hair, about 5'11", and he had twin sisters, Maribel and Marceline, making them triplets. Both Maribel and Marceline have blonde hair as well, but to keep them apart, Maribel always kept her hair short, kind of like a bob, while Marceline kept hers very long and straight. Their parents' names were Benjamin and Rita, both having blonde hair but his father having brown eyes and their mother having green. Their mother and father were both tragically killed in a car accident when they were around the age of 10. Ben and Rita worked as restaurant owners, a pizzeria to be specific. They were raised by their Aunt Trish. Trish was a sister of the mother, and that side of the family was very well off. Based on this info and the information that Gary had given me, we don't think it was a homicide, but according to the FBI, it has been allegedly said that Rudy was being followed up until they had found him dead in his high-scale apartment. Before we jump into the aftermath of Rudy's unfortunate passing, let's look back to the days leading up and a little backstory about Rudy, shall we? Let's get a glimpse into Rudy's life. Rudy had loved to vacation, and he was very fortunate in the fact that he ended up with his parents' inheritance money when they had passed. And growing up, both of his parents, even with being well off, definitely didn't act like they were. They didn't own some big mansion in the Big Apple. They lived in a quiet suburb in a good public school. And like every kid, Rudy had a sweet tooth. Any sort of sugary sweet thing he could get his hands on, he would. Constantly begging his parents to buy him the latest candy that would be coming out, or just sticking with his all-time favorite, as his parents encouraged him to do so because it would be a waste of money if he ultimately didn't like the new candy he wanted. And his favorite, you ask? Well, lollipops, of course. Cherry, grape, cotton candy, any flavor, it didn't matter. He loved them all the same. Just like if you love this video, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and hit that noti bell so you can see more of our videos and don't miss when we upload. It was October 27th, 2021 when Rudy had a sense that he's being followed, but anytime he would try to catch whoever it was, they were just gone. And it was almost Halloween, so everyone was getting decorations put up, and whoever was the big fanatics of this holiday already had theirs put up well before this time. When it comes to Halloween for Rudy, however, he dreaded that holiday, because it only meant another year went by without his parents around. They both passed on Halloween night. A drunk driver had not seen them as they were driving through the intersection and T-boned them. Rudy and his two sisters were out trick-or-treating with Aunt Trish and heard the sirens blaring as ambulances and cop cars rushed to the scene, which had just happened a few blocks from where the kids and Trish were. Going up to the scene to get a little closer look as to what happened, Rudy and his sisters immediately recognized the car that had been clearly wrecked at this point. That night still haunts him to this day, and he refused to buy any sort of Halloween candy, no matter how tempting it is. His trauma just wouldn't let him indulge. Everyone he knew that, so they didn't press him. For the next few days, walking to work, he would feel a presence behind him. It eventually got to the point where he had to just ignore it and just hope it away, but it never did. I know if it was me in his shoes, I wouldn't be able to just ignore it. Like, I can imagine that it's the creepiest feeling in the world to be followed or watched. You can just feel the person staring at you without even looking at them. Jumping to Halloween night, living in an apartment, he didn't have to worry about kids trying to trick-or-treat in the building. All of the parents that lived in the building took their kids to the big Halloween bash in Times Square, so the building was completely empty aside from a few people who didn't have kids. He was just enjoying a nice adult beverage when he had a knock at the door. Not expecting anyone at this hour, especially when it was already 7 p.m. when the bash was in full swing, so there couldn't be any trick-or-treaters out and about. Peeking through the peephole, Rudy saw nothing out of the ordinary, just another door across the hall from him, which housed a girl he had been crushing on ever since he moved into the building a few years back. Let's call her Lucy for confidentiality reasons. Rudy opened his apartment door and looked up and down the long hallway to see if there's anyone walking away from his general area, but there was no one. Looking down, though, there was a jack-o'-lantern pail. You know the ones, the bright orange plastic ones you get from your local supermarket to store buttloads of candy when going trick-or-treating. I had one growing up for sure, just like many of you did. That plastic handle just couldn't withstand the amount of candy I had gotten when going from door to door. It would constantly just pop off, and I would have to carry the bucket with both my hands. Anyway, enough about me. What about you guys? Let me know down in the comments about some of your Halloween costumes or traditions you used to partake or still do. Now, Rudy was getting increasingly uncomfortable. Staring into that bucket was none other but the new lollipops that had been circling the city at an incredibly high rate. Gary couldn't get the name of the brand for me, unfortunately, but we can't always get what we want. Anyway, this brand was the hot new take of the candy world. Rudy, seeing these lollipops, was no doubt tempted by them. They almost seemed to resonate with him, wanting him to take them and just ingest the entire bucket in one sitting. It had been so long since he had a sucker. I guess you could say that he was a sucker for him. But, yeah, sorry. Bad dad joke. Anyway, seemingly impulsive, he snatched that bucket from in front of his door and shut it behind him. Cradling the bucket in his hands, gazing into its open top, he spies a bright red one, sitting right on top. He moved over to his couch and sat down, never averting his eyes away from the shining beacon that was the red sucker. Shaking his head out of this sort of trance, he decides to just leave the suckers be, at least for a time. Going back to doom scrolling through Facebook Reels, he happens across a video that has seemed to become viral almost instantly, it seems. A weatherman was doing his usual thing when all of a sudden his eyeballs seemed to be bulging out of his head. Screaming incoherently, Rudy shuddered at the amount of stress that the man was in and hit the lock screen on his phone, cutting out the video and the noise that came from that man's mouth. Rudy then gave in to temptation, after glancing at the bright bucket quite a few times while doom scrolling, unwrapping the red sucker and immediately popping it into his mouth. He was immediately filled with a burst of flavor and an almost sense of guilt for allowing himself to consume this lollipop. And after a short time of savoring this lollipop, he had begun to feel quite odd. And dizzy, heart rate slowly increasing, not thinking anything of it, Rudy finishes off the last bit of sucker that he had left. And as he does, the sucker finishes off the last of him. His neighbor Lucy called the police to report an odd smell coming from the apartment across from hers and that she hadn't seen Rudy for a few days since before Halloween. Catching the tip on the police scanner, the Foundation sent a squad to Rudy's apartment to contain the SCP. These suckers have been found to be plaguing the area, and they finally got a tip that was worth the investigation. The squad then arrived on scene and gathered up the different flavors of lollipop, careful to not leave any prints about the apartment, donning gloves, hazmat suits, and shoe covers. They then vacate the property, and the police arrive shortly after. They find Rudy on his couch, completely devoid of blood. In the autopsy report, it says as such, but there was no puncture wounds, no signs of struggle or foul play. Unsure of what to classify this as, on the report it read natural death, even though a correct cause of death is found. Maribel, Marceline, and Aunt Trish were all notified of his unfortunate passing, to which they were absolutely crushed by this news. They had a beautiful candlelight visage to commemorate Rudy and his achievements and the light that was taken from them. And they will never know why it happened so soon. Young Rudy here has succumbed to the effects of SCP-819, nicknamed the Vital Suckers. As you guessed it, these suckers literally suck the fluids from your body in correspondence of color. Red for blood, blue for water, purple for cerebral fluid, yellow for urine, orange for stomach acid, and green for phlegm. We still don't know where these elusive suckers came from, but we have them securely contained in a facility under the safe class containment area, so that way no one else can be harmed by these bad boys. Well, sort of made. Call me dumb, but they're so freaking good. And there's a chart that tells you what flavors and colors there are and what effects, and I'll put that in the description down below. They're housed at Site 19 in a secure locker, and evidently Gary got permissions from Dr. Drain to access them. He's the guy in charge of keeping the SCP contained in all of these experiments that happens with these suckers. It was actually recommended to reassign them to the Euclid class instead of Safe class, but it was ultimately denied and is still kept under the control with the locker containment. Going over a few of these experiments here that Gary had brought the results of is quite interesting. The first of the experiments was just a simple taste comparison. A D class was given 2 of each flavor lollipop, one of which was a sample from the SCP, and the other one was simply an ordinary lollipop. They just needed to briefly taste each one and comment if they had a difference in flavor. And as I suspected, there was no difference in flavor between the lollipops. However, probably better in the future that they mark the handles to ensure there are no accidental mix-ups. Wait, Gary, are these SCP or just ordinary lollipops? Oh, you don't know? Wonderful. Thanks for that. Anyway, the next experiment was a red lollipop. Chart here says that it is cherry flavored. The class D began to consume the lollipop, showing no symptoms at first, aside from tachycardia, which in layman's terms means his heart is beating abnormally fast. After about 5 or so minutes, the subject began to look pale, with still that tachycardia and diastolic and systolic blood pressure. Which, again, in layman's terms, you know that number that pops up when you get your blood pressure checked at the doctor's? Yeah, the diastolic is the bottom number and systolic is the top one. Diastolic measures between heartbeats when the heart is filling with blood, and systolic is the force in which the blood is pumped out of the heart. And over the course of the next several minutes, the subject's blood pressure began to drop, making their heart beat faster. At 10 minutes, the subject showed signs of hypovolemic shock. That just means the amount of blood in the body is decreasing, so it's preventing the heart from pumping enough blood to the body's organs and tissues. Severely life-threatening stuff right there. They had also become less lucid as blood pressure dropped even further. They had then lost consciousness just after a few moments and expired about a minute after that. The autopsy here shows that the cause of death was lack of blood. Shocker, right there. And it was estimated that the subject had lost over half their blood supply during the course of the experiment. Good golly, that sucker works fast. The next experiment was on the orange flavor. Unlucky for the subject, his most hated flavor was orange, so he was quite reluctant to eat this one. They showed no symptoms for the first several minutes, but around the 5-minute mark, they started complaining about heartburn. Vitals were fine at the time, and after 30 minutes, there was no further changes other than slight increase of pain. The subject was then released but monitored over the next 36 hours or a day and a half, basically. And over these hours, the subject has complained about stomach pains after eating regular food and gotten the poop-a-doos and slight malnutrition. And there was also a lack of hydrochloric acid in the stomach. They recovered after several days of natural regeneration of gastric acid, but developed ulcers from lack of phlegm protecting the stomach lining during said experiment. Big oof, guys. I've never had ulcers myself, but I can imagine they are quite painful. The next experiment here was for the yellow one, or the lemon flavor. Though the experiment, there was no change in vitals of the Class D. They had just less of an urge to pee than at the beginning of the experiment. The subject was then told to consume a liter of water and wait till the urge to pee was intense. All the while, the test was on hold until then. And then the subject was ordered to consume the lollipop once again. Only after a few minutes, the subject said that the urge to pee had decreased. And after 10 minutes, the urge was completely gone. When they tried to use the restroom, there was no urine in the bladder at all. Oh, there's a note here from the good doctor himself. It says, while this may have some practical use for field agents or sensitive operations, I would appreciate it if staff would stop requesting this SCP for recreational uses. Could you imagine? just consuming these one after another and being able to binge on video games and not having to get up and use a restroom at all. That would be pretty awesome. Next is a green or lime flavored lollipop. After a few minutes, the subject had noted that their sinuses were beginning to clear and gladly continued to eat the lollipop. Within another few minutes, the subject began to complain about their nose feeling very dry and a little painful. And with more consumption came more nasal and sinus pain. Their throat became very sore, as well as breathing became difficult. After the lollipop was consumed in its entirety, the subject was released and monitored over the next 5 days. Lungs were irritated, and the subject developed several strains of stomach and rhinoviruses. After recovering from the illness, the subject was back to normal, although some of the production of phlegm glands were damaged. Now for the blue one, or the blue raspberry flavor. After only 15 seconds, the subject had difficulty seeing, and after a minute, they had lost all sight. It was shown that the eye had begun to shrink and the aqueous humor was depleted. There ain't nothing humorous about this one. But, anyway, after 4 minutes of continued consumption, the patient was able to feel their eye shrinking, but didn't feel any pain up until there was a straining connection to the optical nerve. The eyes, however, didn't rehydrate after the end of the experiment due to the vitreous humor being a non-replenished fluid. And sadly, the subject was terminated after the experiment. That's life, I suppose, or death, in the matter of speaking. Lastly, the purple, or grape one. Within around 20 seconds, the subject had developed a severe headache and weakness. Reclining, however, helped lessen the headache, which means it was an orthostatic headache, which means the headache was caused by a decrease in cerebral spinal fluid. They were then ordered to sit up and continue with the experiment. They then complained of dizziness, vertigo, and double vision. After only 3 minutes, the subject fell unconscious and was pronounced deceased only 30 seconds after. The lollipop in question was only slightly consumed, so you don't need a whole lot to feel the effects. Autopsy showed a severe lack of cerebrospinal fluid, causing the brain to lose its floatiness and constrict the blood vessels, providing blood to the brain. So, within that 3-minute time span, the subject went brain dead. This one is definitely scary. Gary, you better hope that this wasn't an SCP, otherwise I am screwed here. Wow. Guys, this case was definitely something. My stomach hurts just thinking about it. I hope you enjoyed this case, and I hope you learned something. The moral of the story is don't take candy from an unknown person or thing. But let us know in the comments about your thoughts and feelings and what SCP you'd like to see in a case file for the next case. Until then, be safe, courteous, and polite out there. And remember, stay anomalous.